Welcome back to Hashtag Strong. I'm so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are speaking with Matthew, who is zooming in from England. He is the founder of If You Care Share, which is a foundation, and it's a foundation supporting the awareness of suicide and helping people with understanding how we can prevent future suicide. So if you are someone who is watching this right now and very uncomfortable with this topic, I encourage you to probably stop right now and maybe pick it up at a different time. If you are the parent with children around you and you're not comfortable with them listening to this conversation, I encourage you to pause it and maybe watch it when you're on your own. And when you're ready, begin to have that conversation with your children. Because as an educator, I believe it's important that we start having more of these conversations. And I know Matthew's going to talk to us about prevention. But before we get into that, welcome, Matthew, to Hashtag Strong. I'm so thankful that you could make it and have this conversation with me today.
Thank you. Really grateful to be on, Maria. And yeah, I know we've spoke previously, but just really excited to speak on a level which unfortunately, we both understand, but hopefully can bring some understanding or even some comfort to some individuals who might be listening.
And I think it's important also to say that neither of us are professional psychiatrists or psychologists, and we're not talking about suicide from that angle. We're talking about it through our own personal journeys and our own personal experiences. Matthew, before we talk about how suicide became a topic that you had to face because of losing your brother, I'd like to take you down memory lane before it ever happened. Can you remember what the younger Matthew was like, what his worldview looked like at that time?
Yeah, I can. I suppose there's the Matthew before that experience, and there's the Matthew after, because they are two very different people. I was relatively young, when unfortunately kind of I experienced the loss that I did. But if I think back to so I was 10 when I lost my brother, but before that, um, I would say I lived a very privileged, and I was very fortunate in terms of kind of my quality of life. Um, we as a family were very, very close. I live in the northeast of England, in a place called County Durham, near Newcastle, and the northeast itself is a very community orientated place. You have local villages that really kind of come together. Everybody knows each other, and the village that I lived in was very much like that. I had a good group of friends growing up. I can always remember being well looked after from my mum and dad. The usual kid stuff of playing out, playing football a lot, or soccer was and still is my huge passion. But I can look back at my childhood with real fondness. I wasn't great at school, but I wasn't bad at school either. I was kind of in the middle ground, and I can just remember happiness, being happy, spending time with my older brother Dan, and with my younger brother Ben, with my parents, with all of my friends. And even talking about it now, it fills us with warmth, because it was happy. It had the natural difficulties that everybody does, but nothing to any huge extent. I didn't experience any bereavement, any loss in my life until the age of 10. But in terms of the manner in which I did experience that, it was a loss like no other, because I lost my older brother to suicide, and I still now can feel can feel some of the emotions I felt that day. I can feel what I did that day. You know, I can almost smell that day, if that makes sense, because certain things from that day are so vivid. Because it was a normal day. It was a bank holiday in Easter. And me and my parents and my younger brother had gone out shopping. Older brother Dan, who was 19, stayed at home because he was far too cool to come shopping with us, and that was normal. And then came home later that day, and I remember I'd put Spy Kids 3D on the TV, and you know that was kind of really coming in at that point, the 3D stuff. And um, it was probably 5 minutes we'd been in the house, and my mum started screaming upstairs, and my brain initially thought that somebody was in the house, somebody was going to harm my mum. My dad went upstairs, screaming. I could hear Dan, shout Dan's name. So I went upstairs. I told my brother to stay downstairs. Went upstairs, went into my mum and dad's ensuite, and unfortunately seen what Dan had done. And you know, I can really remember that. After that is a blur. I can remember I was at the end of the street waiting for an ambulance. I can remember I was in my neighbour's house. And then the next thing I remember, it was the nighttime, and I was at my grandparents' house. And then days, weeks after, I can't really piece time together after that. I can't remember when I went back to school. I told the story not a few years back, and I was with my mum at the time. And I'd said, I went back to school a few months later. I'd actually gone back to school a week or 2 weeks after, but time had just kind of merged together. Because, you know, a loss by suicide is horrendous. There is no real kind of way. There isn't a stepping stone. There isn't something to tell you this is how to deal with that grief. But ultimately, you know, I'd experienced grief by suicide, but also I'd lost my older brother. I'd lost my best friend. And there was no rational answer to that loss, because my brother was the happiest, you know, happy-go-lucky, popular, had a job, had a future, and there was no why. There was no indication. There was no real kind of something you could pin it on to say that is why Dan had made that decision. So if one of the most invincible people that you could ever imagine could feel that way and do that and not give any indication, then where does the hope come from after that? And, you know, the person I've always looked up to, where does my hope come from that? And to then try and live a normal life after that is impossible, because every decision that I would make or every thought that I would have would somehow have bearing on the fact that, well, what if Dan was here, or what if Dan was doing this, or I wonder how Dan would feel in this, or questioning why, and what if I could have done something? And, you know, that manifested over the years into depression and anxiety, into dealing with OCD, and still dealing with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, because I had lost control of I had no control of loss, and that was really what was staring me in the face. And I was terrified, and still am terrified of losing anything else that means something to me. And it's still, you know, still now forms the basis for how I create relationships with people, how I create friendships, the anxiety that is caused for me by doing certain things, and the loss of missing out on things, of, you know, that I should have shared and still should have shared with my brother. You know, Christmas time is such a difficult time, but even things like, England playing in the World Cup, I should have watched that with my brother. I spent the time watching it with some of his friends. I should have been doing that with my brother. And I don't know whether this might sound slightly, I feel cheated. I feel like I've been robbed of time that I should have had with somebody that should still be here. And the why still doesn't exist. It's still not there. And I think, there was a time where I even tried to persuade myself that somebody must have broken our house and done that to Dan, because the brother that I knew wouldn't have done that. But, over time, I've done a lot of soul searching and understanding myself and understanding my own loss and how I deal with that. And I would say I'm fortunate in the most unfortunate of positions that it had. It's made me an expert in something I never wanted to understand and never talked about before this.
I can totally resonate with that. It's just not a topic. I sometimes feel angry that I have to focus on this topic. It's not a topic that would have been a topic I would have ever chosen. It's almost something that I was forced to have to be part of. And in that experience and listening to you as well, my son was 10 when his sister left us by suicide. And I can't even for a minute begin to understand the mind of a 10-year-old having to make sense of what happened to their older sibling. So listening to you is actually healing for me, because it's helping me to think about how my son might have received the information. Now, unfortunately, you walked into the room and saw it happen, or saw how it had happened. Do you think that it would have made a difference if you hadn't had to see? Do you think it would have been better for you? Or do you feel that because you saw that you were more able to make it make sense, if it could ever make sense?
It's such a good question, and it's a question I've asked myself so many times. I suppose it allowed me to rationalize what had happened a little bit, and I mean, my tiniest of minute percents, because I seen it. Would I be better off if I hadn't seen it? I don't know. My younger brother fortunately didn't see that. But we're two very different people, and obviously we react to things. We were different ages. He was only 5 at the time. So if I could go back, I wish I hadn't seen it, because my memory of my brother, bar that memory, is utter happiness, and and laughing and joking, and it's clouded by that one image that will stay with me forever. So I don't know, because I would have painted that picture in my head if I didn't see it. So I don't know what the answer is. I think if I could go back, I would have made the decision to not see it 100%. But would that have put me in a better position? I'm not so sure.
What would you say, aside from the obvious, were the challenges that you're still having to face, or maybe that you faced when you were younger, that maybe you're seeing in the work that you do is still needing to be changed in our system?
I think the biggest challenge for me, and I know this is glaringly obvious, is loss. Because it's never, in terms of the education system in the UK, we don't talk about loss. We don't talk about bereavement. But specifically a loss by suicide adds a lot more complicated stuff to that. But I very much fell into, I I can still remember at 10, 11-year-old saying to myself, right, I'm the older brother now. And you have to be to Ben what Dan was to you. At 10, 11, I was putting that responsibility on myself. I also took on the responsibility of the fact that I was hypersensitive of how I felt and how I acted impacted my mum and dad. So my emotion would impact, and still does, my mum and dad. So by my own decision, I suppressed it. Now, what that manifested in was actually years of feeling low, years of trying to escape in different ways, and years of trying to mask what I was dealing with, because I didn't want that to impact on my mum and dad, because they had lost their son and they were visually struggling and still do. So I had to manage my own grief to the point that I was conscious of my own parents and the impact that would have on them. You know, I'm now outliving my older brother by quite a significant number now, by 9 years, and surpassing his birthday. That, in terms of the loss, everybody looks at it and we have deadlines on when we'll be okay again. I will never be okay in terms of what happened to me, because the path that I was on in my life doesn't exist anymore. I can't get back on that path. I walk another path now, and it's, I still have a fantastic life, and I'm grateful for so many opportunities and so many memories I've had. But the place that I want to be, that final destination or that journey, doesn't exist. And there isn't an end date of what I feel in terms of that loss, because I turned 19 and then I'm thinking, well, I'm outliving my brother, but also what about them things I should be sharing with my brother right now? And that still comes now. I'm very fortunate that I've just been able to get my own place and move out of my parents' house, which just took a little bit of time, but I can't tell my brother about that. And I think, where that always will come up. I'm coming at Christmas time. Christmas time is where it should be, it's the most wonderful time of the year, but actually for myself and my family, it can be really, really tough. Even something as simple as a Christmas present that you don't have to buy, or the seat at the table that should have been filled that is no longer filled. So I suppose that's a real long-winded answer of saying, I think what I found most tough is the cycle of the grief. Because for those that maybe don't understand grief, it continues to go around, and there are still times where I can feel like 10-year-old Matthew again, and I can still question and still not understand why I'm in this position.
Matthew, I'm listening to your story and it's evident I'm getting emotional myself. It is probably the hardest conversation to have. I think it doesn't matter whose story you're either listening to or talking about, you find yourself captured in your own memories. So I apologize for getting emotional right now, but it's a topic that we don't talk about at school. And one of the challenges that I hear again and again is children are too young to talk about it, and we shouldn't be talking about it. But your brother was 19, my daughter was 21. If we don't talk about it, aren't we doing them a disservice? Now, my son was 10, you were 10. My middle daughter was 13, turning 14. They had no choice but to live the experience. You had no choice. Your brother was 5. Do you believe that we shouldn't be talking about this at school? Do you think this is something that we need to start having more conversations about?
100%, 100%. It's the elephant in the room that everybody knows is there, but we are terrified of opening up this can of worms, But the fact is that the worms are already all over the room. I think my sole kind of belief is we have to talk about it, but we also have to talk about it in the right way. I think it can't just be something where we put a few words on the screen and think, right, okay, tick onto the next criteria or the next part of the curriculum, because that doesn't work. Young people are talking about this anyway. So actually, why can't we be part of the conversation? You know, you see it so many times now of so many powerful young people who are coming out and talking about this subject matter because they're living it every single day. So why can we not give them the platform or assist in that to continue to grow this? Because the fact of the matter is that, you know, Dan was never told about this at school. I was, because of my circumstances. I still have, and I always find this difficult, and I get a lump in my throat. Some of my best friends, and I mean my best friend who I grew up with, we never spoke about the real kind of experience with my brother until we were in our 20s. So we went 12 or 13 years where we never spoke about it because he didn't know what to say to me. I didn't know how to instigate that conversation, because why would I bring that up? Because I don't know what he knows. Because we weren't given the tools, we weren't given the encouragement that we have to talk about the dark and difficult things that we all experience in life. And, you know, we have to. We have. It's a duty of care to the young people. But I know you've said this before, and it's so right. Of they are the future, and it's such a cliche thing to say, but they are the teachers that are going to stand in front in the next 15 to 20 years and make a difference to young people's lives. So why not break the chain? Why not break the mold and actually give these young people the opportunity and, you know, the strength, exactly what we're talking about in terms of what you host within this show of life is really tough sometimes. It is. Life has amazing parts. Life has the most, you know, gifting things brought, but it can be really, really hard, and that's okay. I think sometimes we try to pretend that everything is sunshines and rainbows, but actually quite often we can live with cloudy days, and we can dance in cloudy days as well. You know, I think why I feel so passionate, and obviously I share my difficulties, but I think where I want people to understand where I come from is I still really struggle. I do, and you know, I feel pain, that is indescribable, but I feel so much happiness for myself, and for the memories that I'm able to make and the opportunities that I still have, and for, you know, that loss that I've experienced. It's allowed me to help others. It's allowed me to understand life in a way I wish I didn't have to be honest. But I think no matter what that adversity, that pain is, there's strength after it, and there is still life after it. But we have to talk about that. And I know you said it to me before, that the power of people's experience is so valuable. And I think quite often we deter away from that for the same reason that we'll always excuse ourselves as not being experts, because it's not seen as researched. No, it's real, and it's relatable, and it's what people understand, and it's hope. You know, the fact that we can sit on this call and, you know, we can get upset because that's our experience. But, you know, if we can't understand it and empathize with each other, then who can? But the fact that we can even sit and, you know, reflect and talk about this for the benefit of others is hopefully strength, and hope that you can continue.
Did you feel growing up that Matthew was overshadowed by Daniel, who was always in the room? in memory?
Yeah. I think even now there is I always come with my little extra conversation piece, which people will always bring up of, even in their difficult times, they almost pass it off. Well, it's not as difficult as what you've dealt with. Um, or we talk about, people want to reflect with me and reminisce about memories with Dan, and it's lovely to hear. But there is always that extra baggage. I am viewed to a certain kind of part of the population as the lad who lost his brother to suicide. And quite often that can give people permission to seek help in me, which I think is fantastic because it's almost viewed as, oh, well, he understands. The fact of the matter is, though, we all understand that people struggle with life. I think we just don't. We're terrified of opening that up because we think other people won't understand, but we do all understand because we all deal with our own difficulties. But yeah, I still feel that now. I still feel that sometimes it's viewed, I quite often get, and I appreciate that this is slightly difficult for you, but obviously with your kids, it is viewed that my grief isn't as bad as my mum and dad's, or especially my mum's, because, that was her child, that was who she brought up. And there is that view, and I have had that, it's not as bad for you as it is for your mum. And that's hard to hear. That is really hard to hear because,
So unfair to
yeah,
hear. It is
there
so
is no
unfair.
grief top trumps, is there?
No, there's
No,
no rank and privilege in grief.
of course not. Of course not. And that comes from a place of ignorance. And, you know, would you rather be totally aware of this subject matter or be completely ignorant to it? I'd rather be completely ignorant to it
I would
because
too.
it means that we haven't felt what we felt. Um, and ignorance can be bliss around this subject matter. Um, but I think what we are realizing as a population is right now, I know for a fact, when I talk about what I do in my role now within kind of work, there is always, when I speak to somebody that says, I know somebody who took their own life, or I know somebody who struggles, or I've struggled personally. So actually the ignorance isn't there because we've all experienced it, but are we actually communicating that in the right way? Quite often, probably not.
No. I I want to take you to If You Care Share Foundation. Hashtag Strong began for two reasons, I think, if I'm very honest. One was out of protection for my younger children who were constantly being told to be strong. And for my understanding, strong then meant don't show emotion like I did. And I apologized for. I still do that. And I think, why do we do that? Why do we have to apologize? And you did say you don't need to apologize for that. But I think society is not ready to see emotion. And so I started hashtag strong to share stories, but it never would have come to life if I hadn't touched this topic on a personal level or this topic touched me. And I know that If You Care Share Foundation had a similar start for you. Tell us a little more about where the idea for If You Care Share Foundation came, and tell us more about what it is and how it helps people.
Yeah, well, I think, it was born out of loss. It was born out of what we felt as a family and as a community. Because, when I talked about our village and everybody knowing each other, our village completely shut down when Dan died because it affected so many people. Um, and I think really, really what came from that was myself and my cousin. Sarah, who was basically is like a sister, came up with the idea of a wristband, and we just wanted something with Dan's name on. We wanted that legacy. We wanted to kind of really have a memory for everybody to keep them there, and we just wanted to raise a little bit of money for charity. And the slogan, "If you care, share," the idea was, if you care about your family, your friends, but most importantly yourself, you should share how you feel. And that was kind of what became what If You Care, Share is now. We were very fortunate. We raised quite a significant amount of money for Samaritans, which is a national helpline in the UK. We raised just under £50,000 for Samaritans, and that kind of snowballed into what we do now. My mum, who is very much a force of nature, took it upon herself. She really identified what was missing for Dan, but what was missing for us when we lost Dan as well. And that is what If You Care, Share is now. So what we do, we aim to prevent suicide. So we work with young people from the age of 4, 5-year-old, all the way up into the 20s and beyond, talking about mental health, talking about emotions, talking about suicide where it's appropriate, for appropriate age groups, but in a real interactive, engaging way. We also support people who's at risk of suicide in the Northeast. We train people up on how to intervene with somebody who might be suicidal. So that can be businesses, community groups, anybody and anyone that's having these conversations already. But we also support people who's lost somebody to suicide. The main reason for that was when we lost Dan, nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew where to point us. My mum and dad would have people they knew very well would cross the road because they didn't know what to say and wouldn't say anything to them. So we now support people within 48 hours after a loss. For me, the nucleus of If You Care, Share, what we do now, we've worked with thousands, tens of thousands of people now. But I always go back to from the age of 11 when we came up with the idea. I had a interviewer kind of ask me why I came up with this, why we wanted to do it, and I said, I just want to stop one person feeling what I've felt as a brother, and that is everything that will drive and continue to drive If You Care, Share. We're very fortunate. We work on a national basis now, working with professional football clubs across the country. We have our national campaign, which you've been part of, which is Inside Out for Worldwide Suicide Prevention Day, which is the 10th of September. The idea is that suicide turns lives inside out, and it's quite often a conversation we keep on the inside, and we want to get it out there. So we ask people to wear an item or items of clothing inside out and then post that on social media with the hashtag Ask Me Why, just to start that conversation. And conversations save lives. They do. I'm sure from this conversation we're having today, people, if it affects one person, it's worthwhile. It's that we've done this, and I'm sure it has. I'm sure it will. But just to go back to kind of what, the amazing work that you do, Maria, and this idea of being strong. I did it. I thought my strength was protecting everybody else. But actually what I believe was my strength was my weakness, and was dragging me further and further. My biggest strength is when I'm able to show my vulnerability. I'm not always able to do that, but when I do it, I find that it's almost a catapult in the right direction then, because the vulnerability is where I can acknowledge it and do something about it ultimately. And there is, weakness is not showing emotion.
There is so much work that we need to be doing in terms of educating society. I think it has to begin with educating educators
Mm.
around the stories of loss and grief and suicide is, yeah, I remember when we came back from, we had to go abroad. My daughter was abroad, so we had come back from that experience, and I found that I had to protect the children, so I shut everybody out, and I created a mandate, I guess you can call it, that no one was allowed to talk to my children about it because number one, I didn't trust that the conversations that were going to be thrown at them would have been the right types of conversations. And two, I was trying to shelter them from the curiosity of people wanting to know what happened and how it happened. And it dawned on me one day that I found the grief even harder because it was almost like we weren't allowed to talk about suicide, right? Like it was a dirty little secret. Do you find that in the work you do now, I'm getting emotional and I will, because I think we have to bring this out. I think it's hard to see people go through experiences like this and not be allowed to talk about it because society can't handle having that conversation. Do you find that in the work you do right now, that when you're working with families, that it feels like they're embarrassed to talk about it because it's suicide, and you know that almost equates to a parent has failed their child, or a child, I don't know, was not strong enough, or even with your adults that you're working with, because I know that my daughter was young and your brother was young, but let's face it, this is not a death that's limited to age. This happens across the spectrum. Um, do you find that it's a dirty little secret that, that's part of the process of pain that people have to also go through, not being able to talk about it?
100%. 100%. I think, and I can understand why, because there is so much guilt and blame associated with this that we will sometimes mask it, and we sometimes will avoid it because we're terrified of the answer potentially. Um, is the blame, is the guilt in relation to Dan? There's guilt, as there always will be, because we will always feel that we could have done more and should have done more. Um, but that's hindsight, unfortunately. Um, I think I'm in the small minority of being in a fortunate position that we have really spoken about it. That's took years to build that, to do it. And I'm talking years. But we have to, because, within a family dynamic, we're all sat with the same thing, and we're all sat with a similar sort of guilt. Yes, we may have done different things. But having somebody sat across from you that has shared the same, not going to say the same experience, but the same pain in some relative way, we have to. And I think that's where us as an organization can really help, because wears a similar sort of t-shirt in terms of losing somebody, and it's almost that relief and that release of, oh my days, this is somebody that understands and isn't going to judge me for whatever I feel. Because we had we have an event just before Christmas for people that's lost somebody to suicide, and I spoke at that at the weekend, and some people will sit there and they'll still feel anger, they'll still feel guilt, They'll feel this pain that is indescribable. They'll feel sadness. But we don't all feel the same thing at the same time either. You know, for a good couple of years, I hated my brother for what he did, hated him, because I thought, how could he do that to me? I can now look at my brother in with real fondness, with real sadness, because I know what he's missed, and I know if he took that step back, he'd still be here. But there isn't one correct answer. There isn't one right answer in terms of the guilt or the blame, because we ultimately are human beings and are going to react to things differently. So we have to share these things to understand where we all are with that, and to ultimately help each other to cope, not to become stronger, because that isn't the strength, but actually to cope. Strength is coping, right? Like, in the face of the most difficult things, being able to just go, do you know what? This is so hard. I'm finding this the most difficult thing ever. And I want to sit and cry every single day and not get out of bed and not talk to anybody. To be able to say that is the strongest thing that I think anybody could do.
There's a reason I didn't wear any makeup for this interview, Matthew. I knew what was coming. But, I think that sometimes people like you and people like me, and probably people like anyone that's creating something that kind of comes to life from a depth of grief, we come across as strong, resilient, you know, and people will look to people like you and say, how do you do it? So I'm asking you, how do you do it? How do you wake up every day and continue to do what you do, helping other people? How do you show strength without falling apart? And who do you turn to when days are really tough?
Honest answer is sometimes real difficulty. It is hard. Um, do I fall guilty of putting myself in that responsibility of putting the face on for other people? 100%. 100%. Do I apologize for how I am feeling sometimes? 100%. You know, I'm a very emotional person, but it's very rare that I cry. You know, I am today. I feel quite upset at the conversation because it's such a passionate thing for both of us, and to be able to share it. But do I always share my emotion to the best of my ability? No. Because I do still become very hypersensitive of other people. And I'm an empath. I care about other people and how they feel. And I think the definition of strong and people's perception of strong and how they describe me as strong is probably very different to what actually I feel my strength is, because their strength is, how can you get up every day and talk about your brother and stuff, and still be happy and all these things. But they see me for the 1% of the day. They don't see the intrusive thoughts that I have every single day and everything that I do. They don't see the pain that I might feel, the concern I might feel, the angst that I still feel for certain things. The strength for me in every person is the people that continue to not talk about these things and still manage to function every single day and live some relative normal life, whatever normal may be. That for me is a huge strength. What's even stronger than that, though, is talking about that and taking that kind of leap of faith, that step to say, right, this is me, this is what I deal with, and this is my insecurities, this is the things that I deal with every single day. And that isn't just kind of a camp for those that have dealt with a loss by suicide. That's for everybody. And I suppose I find my strength in the legacy of my brother. And continuing that legacy, not of, his loss, but of who he was and the memories that he made and the amazing relationships and the bonds that he created and the lives that he changed. And, if I could be a 1% of the man that he was, then I'll keep continuing to do that.
Oh, we could go on and talk, but definitely need to bring this to a wrap for this conversation. Matthew, if anybody is looking for support, a parent, a family member, a friend, where can they turn if they're in England or anywhere in the UK?
So this is where I sometimes probably don't follow the party line with this, because I think when we talk about people that are struggling, the instant reaction is to talk. And it's right, it's true. And we have to seek help. There's lots of amazing services across the UK. Something that I would promote to everybody to look into is something called the Hub of Hope. So basically that's a directory of services across the UK of mental health services. It's the Just Eat of mental health services. So you put your postcode in, put what you're struggling with, or what you need advice on, and it will show you exactly what is available. So I would always point that in everybody's direction. There's fantastic organizations such as the Samaritans, Papyrus, Calm. But what's around you? What have you got in terms of support from family, from friends? If you're in the education system, obviously staff members. If you're at work, staff members. There is help out there. But where I probably don't toe the party line is talking helps, but it's not the fix all. There is more to find in strength than just talking, because while there is real relief from that, we have to find other things that help us to cope and deal with the day to day. I find my strength in the legacy of my brother, but I also find release in exercise, in spending time with friends, not necessarily talking about what's going on, but spending time with people that I love, with my partner, who she's a massive support for me, and even something as simple as getting up and going for a walk when I'm at my lowest, and the biggest challenge is putting one step in front of the other. Can quite often be the biggest release for me. I think we sometimes try to overcomplicate things when it comes to struggling. We dress it up and we package it up because people can see it as a way of making money. But we strip it down. What helps? What helps you to feel good? What helps you to manage things better? And that might be anything, depending on who you are. It might be as well, you need a little bit of extra assistance. It might be that you need to speak to the health services, your GPs, stuff like that. I'm not ashamed to admit that I've spent most of my adult life so far on medication for what I have to deal with. I'm currently going through the process of trying to taper that down and come off medication, but I'm not ashamed of admitting that, because I needed it, and to a certain extent still do need it. And there's so many answers out there. I think we just need to spend a little bit more time searching. The most important thing I always say to people, especially for people who will sit and kind of listen to these conversations and think, oh, well, this doesn't affect me, I'm all right. That's great, but find out now what would help. Don't wait for things to get bad to then think about, oh, I'll do something now. Do something beforehand, because ultimately we're always going to struggle with something. And if we've got the support already, then it just makes things slightly easier.
Thank you, Matthew. Those are very, very great tips. And I can resonate with that. I think that talking is not everybody's cup of tea, but listening to stories, I think is a great way to begin to understand what you might be feeling as something that other people might be feeling, and then just finding the thing that feels right for you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing If You Care, Share Foundation. But I think what I'm most grateful for is that you and your family have put this together. I think that it's foundations like If You Care, Share that help families across the globe believe that there can be life after grief, and that there are communities that are willing to support and take care of each other. So I thank you for that, Matthew.
Thank you.
And I apologize again to everyone for having to see the blubbery mess that I became today. But you know what? I would be putting on a mask if I wasn't vulnerable having a conversation like this one. It has affected my family. I am still trying to unwrap many of the things that Matthew talked about today. The big why, Matthew, I heard you saying that will never make sense. And I think as a mother, having to go through what happened, it never will make sense, but we have to keep trying to talk about it to prevent it from ever happening to another family. And that brings me right to the end. Thank you, Matthew, for being here. And if you are looking for support wherever you are in the world, please do, as Matthew said, just look for places close to you and try to understand what support looks like for you. There is no copy and paste. I don't believe that there's one size fits all support for anybody. I look forward to seeing you all next month when I bring another incredible guest to #Strong. Until then, keep well, be safe.
Strong, stop the